Most people believe they're prepared for winter because they own the right gear. A modern tent, a sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures, maybe a portable heater or a stack of emergency blankets. On paper, it all looks reassuring. But history tells a very different story. For most of human existence, winter was not a season you endured casually. It was a long, grinding siege where mistakes were punished quickly and brutally. Entire cultures rose or vanished based on whether their shelters actually worked, when the cold settled in for months, not nights. And this is the uncomfortable truth. Many shelters we trust today would fail faster than the crude structures built centuries ago if winter became prolonged, severe, and unforgiving. Before we get into why that happens, take a second to support the channel. If you value deep historical survival knowledge that actually holds up under real-world conditions, like the video, share it with someone who thinks modern gear equals safety, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to WARFRONT Survival. Now let's break down why modern shelters struggle where ancient ones often succeeded. Modern shelters are designed for comfort, not endurance. Most modern shelters are built with short-term exposure in mind. Weekend camping, recreational hiking, controlled environments, and, well, predictable exits. Even so-called four-season tents are designed around portability and ventilation, not long-term heat retention. They basically assume you can leave. Ancient winter shelters, on the other hand, assumed you couldn't. Traditional winter dwellings were designed to trap heat relentlessly. Thick walls, earth insulation, low ceilings, minimal entrances, and controlled airflow were all deliberate choices. Modern shelters, you see, prioritize airflow to prevent condensation, which is fine for comfort, but, honestly, deadly in sustained cold. Heat escapes constantly, forcing the occupant to burn calories and fuel at an unsustainable rate just to stay alive. Thin materials bleed heat faster than fire can replace it. Modern materials are light because, well, weight matters to us. Nylon, polyester, aluminum poles, thin foam pads. These materials lose heat rapidly. They just don't store warmth. Once the heat source fades, so does your protection. Historic shelters relied on mass. Sod houses, turf walls, stone, packed snow, timber, hides layered thick enough to block wind entirely. These materials absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly at night. Fire wasn't just warming the air, it was charging the structure itself. Modern shelters lack that thermal inertia, which means constant heat input is required. When fuel runs low, failure comes fast. Elevated floors and exposed undersides invite the cold in. Many modern shelters are raised off the ground. Tents sit on thin ground sheets. Cabins are elevated to prevent moisture. From a winter survival standpoint, this is disastrous. Cold air circulates freely underneath, stealing body heat all night long. Ancient winter shelters were often dug into the ground or banked with snow and earth. The ground, even frozen ground, maintains a more stable temperature than open air. By sinking the shelter, they reduced exposure and wind infiltration. Modern designs often ignore this principle entirely, assuming insulation alone can compensate. It usually can't. In extreme cold, ventilation priorities are, well, actually reversed. Modern safety standards, you see, emphasize ventilation to prevent carbon monoxide buildup and condensation. That's certainly reasonable in controlled settings, but in extreme winter, uncontrolled ventilation quickly becomes a liability. Traditional shelters, interestingly enough, used precise airflow management. Smoke holes were adjustable, allowing for just the right amount of ventilation. Entrances were designed cleverly to trap cold air in lower chambers. Air movement was controlled, not constant. On the other hand, modern shelters often leak air through seams, zippers, mesh panels, and fabric pores. The result? A steady loss of heat that, honestly, no sleeping bag can fully counter. Most people, I think, assume access to manufactured fuel, propane canisters, processed firewood, electric heaters, backup generators. But these systems fail when supply chains falter or conditions prevent resupply. Historically, shelters were built around the fuel that was available locally, and people really focused on keeping consumption to a minimum. Dung, peat, driftwood, charcoal, or just small, carefully controlled fires were enough because, well, the shelter itself did most of the heavy lifting. Now, modern shelters, on the other hand, often require high-output heat sources to make up for how inefficient they are. And when the fuel finally runs out, the shelter alone doesn't offer much protection at all. Moisture management, honestly, is one of the most misunderstood aspects in modern shelter designs. These days, condensation is usually just treated as a bit of a nuisance. But in winter survival, moisture can actually be a real killer. Modern shelters tend to trap moisture inside fabrics, which then dry very slowly in cold conditions. Sweat, breath, melting snow, and even condensation itself all build up, soaking your insulation and clothing. Traditional winter shelters, you know, they really emphasize drying as a daily survival task. Fires were carefully positioned so that hides, clothing and bedding could dry out continuously. Materials were specifically chosen because they could handle moisture without collapsing thermally. But with many modern synthetic systems, once they get damp, they often lose effectiveness, which just accelerates heat loss night after night. Human routines, you know, mattered more than shelter shape. This is actually where modern thinking fails the hardest. Shelter alone, well, it never saved people. Routines did. Ancient winter survival, it revolved around strict patterns. Controlled movement to prevent sweating, timed fuel use, careful layer management, sharing body heat, and, of course, keeping night watches for fire maintenance. Modern shelters, they tend to assume individual use, passive warmth, and, honestly, uninterrupted sleep. But in real winter conditions, passive systems just fail. Survival, it requires constant management. Shelters designed without this reality in mind, they only encourage dangerous complacency. The lesson history keeps teaching us, time and again. The failure of modern shelters isn't really about technology being bad. It's about our priorities being wrong. We design for convenience, mobility, and short-term exposure. Pre-modern people, on the other hand, designed for inevitability. They assumed winter would test every weakness repeatedly until something broke. If you strip away modern infrastructure and stretch winter long enough, most contemporary shelters would fail, not because they're poorly made, but because they were never meant to endure what real winter actually is. If this breakdown changed how you think about shelter and survival, make sure you're subscribed to WARFRONT Survival. Share this video with someone who believes gear alone equals safety. Drop your thoughts in the comments and, well, stay with us as we continue breaking down the hard lessons history already paid for in blood and ice.